At the tail end of season 21, Colin Baker made his brash, loud, and certainly colourful impact as the Sixth Doctor. Colin Baker approached the role with much more enthusiasm than any of his predecessors in my opinion. Sadly, his era was plagued with problems scattered everywhere: a new 45-minute format, an 18-month hiatus, a lack of faith in Doctor Who from the BBC, all resulting in Colin Baker being fired as the Doctor after just 2 seasons. With all that in mind, the Sixth Doctor era must be a complete disaster, right? Well, yes and no. We're here today to rank all of the Sixth Doctor's stories because, like any era, we have ups and downs, and there's certainly plenty of ups to be found here. Before we start, small disclaimer: even though Trial of a Time Lord is technically one story, I am going to rank the individual stories on this list just to keep things more varied. It also means I can give the Sixth Doctor 11 stories rather than just the meagre 8. With all this in mind, at the bottom of the barrel we have number 11, The Twin Dilemma. I didn't think it was possible to go from a serial with as high as quality as Caves of Androzani to a low as such as this, but The Twin Dilemma proved me wrong. Positives aside, I do like the Doctor's interplay with Edgeworth, and the scene where he comforts him as he dies is really touching, but let's be honest, you're all here to watch me tear this story to shreds. It is sort of amazing how every creative decision made in the Twin Dilemma was the wrong one in hindsight. They really should have waited to introduce the Sixth Doctor next season, when they had the time to come to an agreement of how to even characterise him, and leaving this sour taste in the mouths of audiences for 9 months was certainly not a smart move. The idea of an unstable Doctor is a brave idea, and I know it is only his first story, but when introducing a new Doctor, it's arguably the most important serial to leave an impact on the audience. Furthermore, the entire script and production is a cheap, bland, and uninspired mess. Mestor is an epitome of 1980s Doctor Who monsters, just falling into every possible stereotype. The dialogue feels like trope bingo, he spouts awful, bland villain monologues, the design is very cheap, his plot is ridiculously far-fetched, and the characterization is just so one-dimensional. And what results is a flat, forgettable villain who really doesn't have a lot to offer thematically in regards to the unstable personality of the Doctor. I mean, if they really wanted to explore that in depth, they could have skipped the rubbish monsters and go all into making the Doctor the villain while he copes with his regeneration, which would have been a wholly more interesting idea than trying to balance his instability with his doctorish qualities. As for his actual scheme, Mestor just feels wafer thin and poorly constructed. He wants to bring planets together so he can explode a sun and spread his eggs across the universe? Why? It just feels like a very juvenile and childish plot, and it just lacks any depth whatsoever. I also find it incredibly underwhelming in the way he was defeated. He was just dissolved after being murdered by the Doctor. And for a story titled after them, the twins don't have much agency on the story. They feel much more like a plot device than actual characters, featuring very little emotional depth at all. The first scene is quite good. They're cold, calculated characters who have little empathy for anyone else, even their own family, and I like that they are aware that being blood relatives doesn't necessarily earn respect. But from that point on, there's no development to let the twins become more developed or human. There's no arc for them at all, and it just feels unfulfilling. This story feels like what everyone expects classic Who to be, and how it has such a bad reputation. Infantile, irresponsible, and brash, the script feels like a fanfic written by a 10-year-old who's trying to be mature and dark and dramatic, but falling flat on their face. The actors are trying their hardest, but without any emotional depth, nor an interesting plot, this story just feels so unrealistic and unsalvageable. Perhaps it may be judged a little harshly, following in the success and highs of the Caves of Androzani, but if the show can reach those heights during the 1980s, then so should this, surely. It has a lot of interesting ideas, but the tone is badly misread and ends up being ironically entertaining rather than genuinely entertaining. For being the utter worst debut story for a new Doctor, The Twin Dilemma rightfully ranks as the worst Sixth Doctor story. Number 10. Time Lash. If you've seen my classic ranking video, you'll know I'm a huge defender of Season 22. But even I can't defend this lame shit. Seriously, that's an anagram of the title. Either the writer was trolling the audience or he knew this really was lame shit. But let's start with the positives. The concept of the Doctor giving a young H.G. Wells his ideas for his future novels like The Time Machine, Invisible Man, The Island of Dr. Moreau, etc. It's a nice idea, and I only wish that the final proper celebrity historical of the classic series got a better send-off than this. However, I do like the makeup on the Borad, and the performance from Robert Ashby is suitably chilling, but aside from these positives, this is just a dull, cliched rebels versus dictators runaround. The conflict isn't interesting and riddled with cliches, and the actors either send it up or look like they've completely given up. Our two regulars don't fare well much either, as their relationship is at their most grating, and I'm just scratching my head as to why they're even still travelling together. The Doctor isn't even the fun type of brash jerk the Sixth Doctor can be, he's just a jerk here. Mary is written as a screaming girl who needs to be tied up and rescued, and it's a huge waste of both of the actor's talent. Furthermore, adding in the revelation that the third Doctor and Jo Grant had visited the planet before in an unseen adventure is just poorly executed. If you're a casual viewer, you're going to be lost as to who these characters are, and if you're a die-hard fan, the continuity errors will be equally as baffling, so nobody ends up winning here. Production fares no better, as the sets are bland and boring with no visual distinctness to them, and the costumes are equally as cheap. And the less said about the interior of the Time Lash, the better, as it looks like the entrance to Santa's grotto. But hey, at least the Blu-ray has given these scenes a neat CGI update. Aside from this, I find very little to recommend about Time Lash. For being a cheap, bland runaround and cliched mess, Time Lash tries to depart with a scream but ends up being able to register a faint twinkle. Number 9. The Ultimate Foe. Attempting to resolve an entire season's worth of questions in under an hour could work if the scripting and production ran smoothly, but in the Ultimate Foe's case, it really didn't. The revelations of the Doctor being put on trial as a scapegoat is terrific. Colin absolutely shines at his disgust of the Time Lords, and the revelation of the Valiard being a future evil incarnation of the Doctor is a great idea. Sadly, all of these elements are crammed into 2 episodes, trying to resolve an entire season arc as well. The Matrix scenes are competently executed, but it feels like a repeat of what we've seen in The Deadly Assassin, without really evolving or trying anything new with an alternate reality. Furthermore, it feels like the money has run out on several areas, like the lack of a new supporting cast when we just have old characters like Glitz and the Master being brought back. They only seem there to spout exposition that isn't very interesting, and the Valiard, as mentioned before, is a cool idea, but this concept is barely explored, and his motivation just feels foggy and unclear. There's the trappings of some interesting ideas, mostly in the fake trial, but they're handled with a profound lack of grace. The entire thing can be boiled down to bad guy has bad weapon that will kill everyone, the Doctor destroys bad weapon and bad guy. And I know most Doctor Who stories can be boiled down to this, but they're usually about something. They usually have some kind of thematic concerns or some kind of storytelling strength going on. The Ultimate Foe tries to be about something, but ultimately ends up as nothing. Being an overstuffed, poorly executed mess, The Ultimate Foe will forever go down as an average conclusion, a pretty been there, done that season. Number 8. Terror of the Vervoids. Quite possibly the most generic Doctor Who serial ever made, Terror of the Vervoids doesn't really work as a murder mystery because, well, everyone pretty much ends up being a killer by the end of this serial. But putting that aside, if you're after a simple running up and down corridors avoiding scary monsters, then you're gonna find it here. The Vervoids are suitably menacing monsters, and the idea that they see human life as enemies and another body to add to their compost pile is pretty obscene, but certainly makes sense. I know it's popular to hate on Mel, but I think she's a breath of fresh air after a list of 80s companions that didn't want to be there, and she works marvellously with Colin Baker. And speaking of the Doctor, I feel Pip and Jane Baker write for the Sixth Doctor very well, making him brash and loud but giving the character an underlying sense of compassion. Sadly, once again, the trial arc drags the story down, and let's try and scratch our heads and get round the idea of the Doctor offering evidence of his own personal future. Not only is he going to have to go through this entire adventure again, pretending he hasn't already seen it on the telly and every plot twist play out, and where is the fun of taking part in an Agatha Christie story in space when you know who the killer already is? But surely if the Doctor is on trial for his life, then this proves that he manages to be proven innocent, right? Otherwise, this fixed point in his future would never happen, and the whole of time and space will be sucked down the toilet bowl, and we wind up in an alternate dimension where Trial of a Time Lord never took place, and I'm not going to think about it anymore. And by the end, the charges of the trial are changed at the drop of a hat in a pathetic attempt to evolved tension, and for being a generic runaround and ultimately undermining the trial arc, Terror of the Vervoids is just perfectly okay. Let's just move on. Number 7. Mysterious Planet. Featuring a great supporting cast, witty dialogue, and excellent-looking robots, The Mysterious Planet may not rank as one of writer Robert Holmes' finest, but this is still a solid story regardless. Colin Baker's softer portrayal of the Doctor is surprisingly welcomed here. When given the right material, this is a really interesting character who has a lot to work with. Robert Holmes understands this incarnation and brilliantly builds a balance between arrogance and determination. I think that the act of putting him on trial places him in a vulnerable position, justifying his right to be snarky at others, including the Time Lords. He's simply defending himself and is rightly cross at injustice. His sass is just brilliant, with wonderful dialogue offered to the character and simply perfect comedic timing from Colin Baker. His anger at the Time Lords and the Valiard shine throughout. He never feels out of character as he mocks and degrades them in his own way. Theoretically, it's not a bad idea to put the Doctor on trial, but the execution means that we cut back to the courtroom every 5 minutes to ask what the point of all this is. The Earth twist comes pretty soon, and it's much less of a twist and more of a plot setup, and it's not particularly an exciting idea to begin with. It's a very common cliche of sci-fi like this. It's not the first time this has been used, and it certainly won't be the last. The foggy woods is wonderfully atmospheric, and again it crafts a very eerie environment, but it's slightly undermined by the brightly lit underground city. So many brilliant settings throughout this story, the underground setting of the robots just sticks out like a sore thumb. As well as this though, the village does look great, but the whole subplot of the primitive villagers isn't anything we haven't really seen before, and it's not very engaging to watch. There's still some great direction throughout this episode though, and for the most part the production does look great. Jafro and the elf-free robot look terrific, and certainly impressed with their towering stature and presence. Glitz and Dibber bounce off each other wonderfully, have genuinely funny dialogue, and have great chemistry as characters and actors, both with each other and the rest of the cast. It's no wonder that Glitz did become a recurring character, because he immediately leaves such an impression on the audience. He's slimy and dodgy, but in a really likeable way. Overall, this certainly isn't the strongest start to the season. It's very formulaic Doctor Who, perhaps intentionally on behalf of Robert Holmes making one of the most meta-commentaries on the state of the show at the time. Whilst not the strongest on plot, The Mysterious Planet stands out with its performances, production and dialogue, which is just enough to make this serial watchable. Number 6. The Mark of the Rani. The Mark of the Rani has a shopping list of great elements that ensures that it is an enjoyable experience. Just don't go looking for a plot anytime soon. Kate O'Mara is fantastic as the Rani, clearly loving the role immensely, but ensuring that the character never descends into a pantomime villain. And as a duo with the Master, they contrast very nicely against the Doctor and Perry, and whilst Nicola Bryant isn't hardly offered her best material, Colin Baker is at the height of his powers here, battling playfully with the villainous Time Lords and playing a crucial role in the story. There are a wealth of other treats too, a prosperous amount of location work that helps to set the scene vividly, a delicate and beautiful musical score, a memorable guest cast with performances from Gorm Granger and Terence Alexander, and a stunning new TARDIS design for the Rani. Seriously, it's way better than the Doctor's. The narrative chugs along in one direction until the end of the first episode, but then it abandons it altogether, and instead of taking any of the suggested plots to their natural conclusion, it chooses to be more about some Time Lord rivalry in the second episode. And yeah, it is fun to watch, but it's not everything that it could be. However, afforded more location work than a normal Doctor Who serial, Director Sarah Hellings takes the opportunity to plaster as many stunning exterior shots across the screen as possible, and the net result is one of the most gorgeous looking stories of this period. The opening is slow, unhurried, and it's complemented by a beautiful score, and takes the time to show the background characters going about their daily lives before they become central to the plot. It's unusual in its easy temperament and relaxed scene setting, but it's really welcomed, though Mark of the Rani is far from perfect. As mentioned earlier, there are 2 plot lines that the Master and the Rani talk about in episode 1, and that the story could potentially be about. Either the Rani's experiments to gain the brain fluid and sort out her problems on her ruling planet, or the interference of history that the Master suggests putting into action. The story could run with either of these, and it could be a quite satisfying 90 minutes. But bizarrely, it just decides to abandon both plot points and becomes nothing but a game of Time Lord tag as the Doctor, the Master and the Rani dash about trying to outwit each other. And yes, it is fun on its own terms, but I can't help think that the plot is suffering as a result. In my ideal version of this story, we would have, say, the Master and the Rani maybe stage an assassination attempt on the great thinkers where the meeting is taking place, thus altering the course of history that the Doctor has to put back on track. It would certainly be a more dramatic conclusion than what we got, rather than the Master and the Rani just getting in the TARDIS and buggering off. But nevertheless, for being the best script from writers Pip and Jane Baker, The Mark of the Rani is an entertaining watch, but don't expect much in terms of a plot. Number 5. Mind Warp. Quite possibly the most hammiest collection of actors ever assembled in Doctor Who, Mind Warp has a nasty and downbeat tone to it, but the cast and crew certainly pull it off. After the Doctor's mind is, well, warped, things just get darker and more twisted, and climax on one of the most dramatic final episodes of a Doctor Who story ever. Mind Warp is also a visual treat for the eyes, with sets, effects, lighting and music all exceeding above average for the 80s. Peri is given a remarkably good send-off. In this story, she's funny, commanding, mouthy, sweet, and her fate is just so tragic. Nicola Bryant has always been on her A-game, but she throws herself into this with everything she has, knowing it's her last story. Her one scene as Peri possessed as Kiv is really fantastic, and the surface of Forest Beta might make your eyes bleed with all the colour, but it is still a very psychedelic alien world that has been never seen in Doctor Who at this point. People tend to forget how good the 80s stories can look, and the image of the TARDIS materializing in a pink sea with a green sky and blue rocks dominating the landscape remains unforgettably creative. The score is suitably haunting and downright wonderful. I only wish composer Richard Hartley did more music for the series. Brian Blessed is a delight to watch throughout this story, putting a smile on my face from his first appearance to his last. He's bold, brash, and loud, but he's capable of great subtlety and compassion that he brings to Yrcanos. I think he's brilliant. Serial. The Doctor may be an arrogant bully in this story, but given that he's been badly affected by the Mind Probe, and the fact he's being called out by his actions by the Time Lords, it allows the Trial of a Time Lord arc to justify its existence, and even push the boundaries that the rest of the season, in my opinion, completely lacked. For being a psychedelic visual treat and a brilliant analysis of the Doctor's actions, Mind Warp easily stands as the best segment of the Trial of a Time Lord arc, for a very good reason. Number 4. Vengeance on Varos. Quite possibly the most original, atmospheric and intelligent Sixth Doctor story, Vengeance on Varos scores highly for its storytelling, which sees a scary Doctor Who run around taking on much deeper context as we experience the politics of the planet Varos that is supporting sick entertainment and get to understand the people who enjoy it as well. Vengeance on Varos is a remarkably prescient Doctor Who story in that it explores a television medium that enjoys watching people suffer and torture, the sort of reality television that has taken a grip over the schedules in recent years. The dialogue is thoughtful, and Varos as a planet is fleshed out beautifully. It's no surprise that Philip Martin was drafted in for a second story. It's one of the things that the story is praised for a lot, but it is worth remembering just how intelligent and striking the framing device of having regular Varosians like Arak and Etta watching the events of the story on their television, just as we do on ours. Any viewer can see themselves bitching about what's on the telly, complaining that it isn't violent or has a satisfying conclusion, blaming the current government for all their problems. It's just so clever and meta. I absolutely love it. Everything about the villain Searle is fresh and deliciously grotesque, from his love of violence, his disgusting, slimy appearance, that wonderful laugh, and the delightful performance by Nabil Shaban. His character certainly wouldn't have made the impact he did without his performance. I'm just going to say it. We haven't seen a worthy new race in Doctor Who quite like this for a few years, and it's no surprise that Nabil Shaban was brought back for a visit as well. Martin Jarvis brings a seriousness and severity to Varosian politics. Throughout, you're completely on his side and watch him walk a fine line between leader and victim as well. The system of government on Varos makes for gripping viewing, and it all comes down to the numbers. If the majority disagree with the governor, he is tortured, and if the majority agree, he survives a blast from the disintegrator for another day. In a world where phone-in polls decide whether celebrities face intense hardship in the jungle, we're only about 3 steps away from this becoming a reality. Just saying. Pushing the boundaries that very few Doctor Who stories attempted at this time, Vengeance on Varos is certainly a highlight in the Sixth Doctor era. Number 3. Two Doctors. This was the first Sixth Doctor story I ever watched, and it may be the nostalgia talking, but this is just so comforting for me. Watching the two Doctors is like watching a theatre production on a warm summer's day with lemonade, but there's meat on the barbecue as well. I'm really getting weird with these analogies. Now, if you're after an action-packed piece or something dynamic, this is not what you're going to be looking for. It's written as a piece of theatre with character interaction and fabulous dialogue just triumphing over action. It's a televisual matinee with the added bonus of delicious visuals. Don't watch The Two Doctors if you want a fast-paced action romp, which seems to be becoming the norm for 80s Who at this point. Robert Holmes' script is brilliantly subversive, exploring the themes of identity and animal savagery, intelligent, blackly comic touches and witty dialogue. Everyone is running around the sun just having a great time, chewing on their scenery and lines and having a blast being in each other's company, and the chemistry between the cast just glows on screen. You could dismiss this whole piece and say that it's slow-paced and the direction misses the mark on the occasions, but that would be just nitpicking and ignoring the wealth of treasures that are in this story. The wonderful moment of nostalgia as we open on the second Doctor and Jamie in black and white before fading to colour. The Androgums are a brilliant creation and a nice dig at cannibalism and eating animals, and I'm not even offended as a meat eater. We have my favourite Doctor and companion back for the length of essentially a six-parter, and they light up the screen any time they appear. Even with Troughton's final appearance in the series, he's given so much to the character and it's wonderful to see him, and he settles back into the role of the second Doctor like he's never been away. Top that off with his interactions with Jamie, and my favourite TARDIS team is just back with style. Sontarans could have been realised better, yes, but I like how they feel part of the supporting cast, as opposed to being the monster of the week, and the performances from the two are strong, though Stike probably gets the most gruesome death in Doctor Who history. Spanish location filming is lush and gives the serial style and class, and the cast look like they're having a whale of a time making this. For being one of my comfort stories, The Two Doctors will forever be a serial that I will never not be in the mood for watching. Number 2. Revelation of the Daleks. Move over, Genesis, this is my favourite Dalek story. Revelation holds back nothing, with human mutants, decapitated heads being turned into Daleks, brutal stabbings, fingers being shot off, adultery, body snatching, psychological torture, alcoholism and more. How much more can you take from this? It's a perverse, squalid world that fascinating characters inhabit, a setting that stretches far beyond the confines of Doctor Who, where the character pairings have so much more to say than the little they do when they converge at tranquil repose. Each double act feels expertly crafted and is impeccably cast, so much so that it feels like a world that is populated by characters that could front a series beyond the trip Doctor Who makes to Necros. It's the perfect world for the Doctor and Peri to visit. This is a Doctor-companion pairing that's always been a bit more larger than life, but for once they're the most subdued and normal characters in the show. Eric Saywood writes with absolute abandon, refusing to conform with the rules of telling a Doctor Who story and producing one of his finest works as a result. Director Graham Harper packs every scene with visual interest, assembles a first-rate guest cast that get to grips with their characters, and ensures that the whole piece is constantly moving, imaginatively realised and thick with atmosphere. A lot of credit for that has to go to the set designers and the lighting supervisor. There is far more much creativity in those areas than was the norm during this period. There is the terrifying notion of people being turned into Daleks on their deathbed, and the psychological implications of that, such as the transformation of Stengos. Then there is the idea of being offered that as a form of immortality as a reward, which is downright chilling. And what about the dead humans that aren't worthy enough? Well, Davros has turned them into food, effectively solving the galaxy's problem with famine. That is so gruesome and so macabre, but I love it. Sixth Doctor and Peri might be forgotten in episode 1, but their material once they join the action is brilliant, and Davros has rarely been written as such a nuanced character, revelling in the madness of his own schemes and seems to be more than just a one-note ranting villain. It's rare for everything to come together quite this perfectly for Doctor Who, and it's even rarer for a story to achieve that and push the envelope quite as much as this one does. Revelation of the Daleks is a thrilling envelope pusher, and I could go on for hours about how much I love this story. It's a remarkable oddity and is stood proudly as my favourite Dalek story. Number 1. Attack of the Cybermen. If you've been on my channel for a while, you'll know this is my favourite Doctor Who story of all time. I've done an in-depth review and even a commentary on this story, so if I repeat myself, I apologise. Regardless, Attack of the Cybermen proves to be a more faithful introduction for Colin Baker's Sixth Doctor than the Twin Dilemma ever did. Certainly spikes in the Doctor and Perry's relationship, but the sarcastic banter between the two is great to watch, and you can tell through performances alone that they're slowly but surely coming to care for each other. The horror of the Cybermen has never been more well realised than it has in this serial. The strength of them is conveyed perfectly, and the macabre cyber conversion process is on full display here. We have partly converted humans that show how their process spreads through galaxies, humans being converted in the background in their cyber control bases, constantly reminding us as to what lies beneath the metal. I know the continuity comes under a lot of criticism. With the advent of Doctor Who on home media and having every story possible available to us, the callbacks to the past don't feel as jarring as they did when this story was first transmitted, at least for me anyway. Set design is sumptuous with moody, atmospheric lighting in the sewers, and the Talos tombs look terrific as well as the scenes on the surface. The desaturated colour and dry ice add to the atmosphere impeccably, and you get the feeling you're on an alien planet. The Cryons are a welcome addition to cyber lore, showing us how humans aren't the only victims in their ongoing quest for survival, and director Matthew Robinson gives this story a stylish look, constantly keeping things exciting, especially during the action sequences that still hold up today, and in the hands of a lesser director it may have looked terrible. Being a gripping action thriller with fantastic pacing, my favourite monsters being a vicious threat, and a wonderful cast and leading man who embraces the role with much more confidence, Attack of the Cybermen will forever be my favourite Sixth Doctor story and serial overall. That's all for the Sixth Doctor era, with Colin Baker sadly being fired from the leading role, and as we entered the late 1980s, what Doctor Who needed was one last chance saloon to take off with the general public. Were the cast and crew able to pull this off? Join me in the next video as the Seventh Doctor makes his debut, and we'll see if Doctor Who can survive the end of the 1980s.